Thanks. Good evening to everyone. And thanks for your invitation. Thanks to Gianrico and Stefan for inviting me. In a certain way, my lecture is linked to some of yours of today and moreover of tomorrow. I offer an overview of the office as flying on an airplane over a whole century. The center of my lecture of today is the office interior, because I am an architect. But I'm seeing it as a control space of power, authority, and discipline. My lecture is not a resume of my book, it's with another point of view, and I'm beginning. Information processing is, I'm sorry for my bad pronunciation in English. Information processing is an ancient task that links past and contemporary societies. The space changes to the methods, instruments of use, and the space where this task takes place, the office. The passage from administration, the base from which authority was exercised, to the Wehrband of Max Weber, can be ascribed to a precise moment in history. It was due to the bourgeois revolution that state and then private administration came to be founded on methods, procedures, and paperwork. While the transition from paper to web has left most tasks unchanged, the office environment has undergone a palpable transformation. The office seems like a complex universe, a setting for the daily interaction between people, but also a place of self-determination and oppression that reflects social history and its evolution, progress and contradictions. On the other hand, the office can be viewed as a system of relationship between the human being and the space, between the human being and the furnishings. These systems of relationships can be variously interpreted in the light of various pointers from social history and the political reading of its phenomena. In his interpretation, Michel Foucault considers the dispositif or apparatus to be an heterogeneous ensemble consisting of discourses, institutions, architectural forms, regulatory decisions, laws, and so on. The apparatus itself is the system of relations that can be established between these elements. The apparatus is characterized by the nature of the connection that can exist between these heterogeneous elements, as the program of an institution or a new field of rationality. Finally, the apparatus thus has a dominant strategic function. The author connects the idea of the dispositif to structures for control or production, such as Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, prisons, hospitals, barracks, schools, and factories. It's an architectural typology designed to permit an internal, articulated, and detailed control, to render visible those who are inside it. But more generally, it's an architecture that operates to transform individuals. This is Foucault. When discussing power structures, Foucault underlines the microscopic, capillary power that actually operates within the social body, rather than above it. Coercive psychology contributes to the transformation of people by generating the illusion of constant surveillance, precisely thanks to those structures, which are of reciprocal visibility. I would like to re-examine the history of office interiors between 1808 and 1960 in the light of Foucault's considerations and with a series of demonstrative projects. If in some cases I appear to be stretching the theory somewhat, it should be said that during the 20th century, the office interior really did seem to materialize Foucault's idea of dispositives, especially when understood as a form of control. This was possible not only thanks to the combination of its internal relations and the organization of the work indicated by office management science, but also through the arrangement of space and furniture. The office can be seen as a means, as much physical as psychological, of exercising microscopic control within the social body of white-collar workers, and indeed it exerted this power on a daily basis. The architectural space and elements that compose it, such as furniture and equipment, might be considered as an apparatus, parallel to the bureaucratic organization that enacted them. It was a matter, therefore, of system that accompany and for the most part direct the work of the white-collar workers. Observation of the succession of spatial, organizational, and aesthetic characteristics of the working spaces reveal how the office design is an ambiguous problem, with not an unequivocal response, but where ideas dominated by rationalism and control have prevailed. In particular, control might be seen as a functional to rationalization. Interiors and furnishings have therefore contributed to the psychological effect of being constantly observed by an spectator, as Foucault wrote. Depending on the time period and organization of work, control may have been implemented vertically, as it directly and from above, or horizontally, with indirect and mutual surveillance. Architects, space planners, and office designers will all have contributed to the productivity of the workers by creating a form of control. Then again, in the best of cases, these professionals actually mediated between management demands and democratic expectation of the society of their time. Shape and aesthetic can therefore be viewed as a captivating mechanisms which to direct employee work in the name of efficiency and profit, even more so than their well-being and the development of personal aptitudes. The hive metaphor. In the late 19th century, insurance and service companies, banks, stocks and exchanges, and trading companies were the pulsing nucleus of the American city. The aspiration of a capitalist middle class, eager for concrete affirmations, were projected sky-high by the office. Rooms with a domestic feel were abandoned, and the businessmen developed their own idea of modernity with the elevator buildings. They were still nowhere near today's skyscrapers, but the introduction of the lift saw working areas rise up out of the ground and the dust, along with the ambitions of those businessmen. In Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, buildings rose from steel structures hidden by brickwork, and were organized according to a strict plan. On the ground floor was the split-level lobby with shops and banks. A series of offices followed over various floors, and finally systems were in the crowning. An elegant palazzo style disguised this dense hive of workers. The tall office building was an indefinite number of stories or offices, piled tier upon tier, one tier just like another tier, one office just like all the other office, an office being similar to a cell in a honeycomb, merely a compartment, nothing more, wrote the architect Louis Sullivan. In 1886, the architect Sullivan precisely defined the practical, technical, and aesthetic characteristics of the new office buildings, which had influenced the architects from the Chicago School. He seemed to be less preoccupied with the comfort of the individual cells. The social metaphor of the hive guided the interior design. It was another working community, a perfect society, where performance was substantially improved when the design of its environment was changed or reorganized. The office hive of the late 19th century was based on the regular cell of the standard office room, which corresponds to the cellular office type. This is a plan of Louis Sullivan, and the standard office room is one of these. It was a replicable unit, each floor the same at the last, with facades characterized by the double window or Chicago window. In some articles and essays from 1901, architect and developer George Hill established the dimension of the standard office room that you can read in the image. These dimensions influenced the general composition of office building, with a notable compression of spaces, and in the early 20th century will give rise to the file buildings. These were extremely tall buildings with perfectly uniform surfaces on every level and perfectly regular offices, like the squares on graph paper. The most famous, we have just seen before, was the equitable building by the studio Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Hill dimensions for the standard room also determined the size of the furniture. In the late 19th century, various domestic furniture companies began to produce desks and archive storage for offices. In fact, a huge number of patents were proposed to the United States Patent Office. For the most part, it was solid wooden furniture with donors and counters that could be used to organize the accounting work. Some furniture, in particular, highlighted the idea of the hive cell, or that of the microcosm in which to close the employee in. The highly imitated wooden pattern desk, with its numerous variants, was the most expensive miniature counting house adopted in offices, with many compartments for archiving documents, a folding writing table, a desk, and the option of fastening work between the shutters. The wooden desk was the symbol of the late Victorian culture, imported to America, which stressed the importance of tidiness and strategies to keep order. These represented a further way to control accountants through the meticulous organization of their actions. The 60 or 100 compartments of the wooden desk allowed storage of just as many documents and objects, but the employee then faced the problem of remembering where they had put everything. This required a reliable mind and a good self-control. The adoption of the cellular office corresponds to a precise hierarchy of rules within the hive of offices. Corner rooms, or those with most light, were reserved for executives, whereas the inner, darker areas were for the lower-level employee. The tea-room variant proposed by Holabird and Roche Studio did not represent any improvement for employees, the space rationalizing space. The corridor led to a large room or anteroom, which in turn led to two smaller rooms, half the size of the first, in a T-shape. The T-shape is here. This is the anteroom, this is the two smaller rooms. Secretaries and shorthand writers worked in the anteroom, constantly subjected to artificial light and people passing through, while the other employees enjoyed the natural light from the Chicago windows and the greater privacy. The interior triggered a psychological mechanism of competition between peers. Personal aspiration to improve professional status and therefore obtain a better place that is closer to natural light were to the advantage of productivity. And then a paternalistic control. Tomorrow we'll have a lecture on Larkin Administration Building, so I'll be more synthetic. The special unit of the room on which office buildings in the early 20th century were based was disintegrated by the Larkin Administration Building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. The architecture was extraordinary, introvert, but projected dynamically toward the skylight as a source of light, which was flanked by the hanging garden. The architect adapted the architectural design to the organization of work. At the Larkin building, administrative paperwork moved down from the top and were therefore passed through the various departments in a gravitational movement. Correspondence was received on the ground floor, brought to the upper floors by lifts, and from there sorted into the lower floors. Employees who handled the final phase of work were located in the central courtyard on the ground floor, here. Here, employees and management worked side by side, visible to everyone, while only a small room was reserved for the president of the Larkin. The building represented the first architectural utopia of democratic work, which put different hierarchies of workers on the same level. In reality, a paternalistic organization ruled the 1,800 employees. It appealed to the individual ethics promoted by the poet Ralph Emerson, who deemed faith in oneself and traditional values indispensable. Work at the Larkin Company was therefore considered to be qualitatively uplifting if performed in a comfortable and welcoming environment. Furthermore, the Larkin promoted cultural and entertainment initiative for its own employees, so as not to create any fractures between office and domestic life, and to simultaneously develop an affectionate devotion to the company. The spaced and golden letters along the galleries of the various floors were texts that phrases the beauty of work and glorified the idea of participating in a community of equals, all committed to one task. The lyricism of the central void reverberated with democratic theory. For right, architecture had become a tool of social reform. And yet, this interior design complied with the logic of control. The extremely height window sills, here, with archive storage of space below, allowed for no distraction by looking outside. In fact, the gaze was always directed to the center space or desks filled with the paperwork. Then there was a total lack of privacy, in addition to the fact that having managers alongside them placed employees in a constant psychological state of subjection. Even the sitting of the for the white-collar workers helped to fix them at their tasks. There were chairs connected to the desk by a hinge, which folded away when not in use. In his autobiography, Wright explained that he invented it to make cleaning the floor easier. But actually, the chair seemed to be more of an ingenious trap to further tie the employee to the daily tasks, limiting movement to the minimum necessary. The field of visibility. In 1911, the engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor published his most famous text, The Principles of Scientific Management. It was the result of 20 years of research, which included experiments in factories and would also influence the office management. The engineer's ideas developed for assessment of the productive capacity of the human being. The work was divided into carefully measured consequential units on the basis of the chronometric experiments by Frank and Lillian Moller-Gilbert. Each unit was addressed to a single employee, the Karl Marx parcel worker, but was planned higher up in the technical office and communicated to the worker via written instructions. The production control clock, breaks proportional to the exertion required for the task, strict initial selection, barracks disciplines, and the hierarchical order between the employees contributed to the success of the system. Moreover, work completed in a little time as possible received a differential piece rate on the basis that it was the man who was paid and not the position. Essentially, Taylor advocated a discipline mechanism in Foucault's words, which coordinated the strength and abilities of every individual to compose a single productive organism. Just like military discipline, which is traditionally highly interrelated with bureaucracy, which is traditional the employee is a body that is manipulated, shaped, trained, which obeys, responds, becomes skillful, and increases its forces. For Foucault, discipline and the methods used to induce it are therefore a form of control. In the early 20th century, scientifically prescribed and planned control and discipline were among the principles of Taylorism that would migrate to the offices, as synchronization, continuity, and speed had to orientate the workflow. Scientific management was adapted in the tertiary sector, thanks to the studies by psychologist Walter Scott and scholars as William Langfield, John Schultz, and Lee Galloway. The premise shared by these authors was that, just like in factories, office work could be fragmented into individual tasks and subject to managerial control. A dissociation of the hand from the brain emerged in offices, as desired by Taylorism, with the separation of the productive offices from the executive offices. It was the hand of the reign of accounting and the birth of the executive as the most important officer, wrote the Marxist critic Harry Braverman. For the author, bureaucratic work could be compared to a trade with specific instruments and tasks, and was no longer a profession as Max Weber has identified it. The employee was considered a productive object who was subject to strict discipline in the name of maximizing efficiency. The working schedule was controlled by the introduction of the time clock, the system for recording entrance and exit times. Pauses of 10 minutes were permitted for every 4 hours of work, and every error or absence had to be reported to the head of the department. Ferocious supervision underlied the disciplinary mechanism imposed on the white-collar workers, no longer information processing professional, but mere material executor. Execution, wrote Galloway, implies control. The office interior fulfilled this aspiration by borrowing from 20th century factories. Large, flexible open spaces, the absence of internal partitions, wide glass walls, and toilet facilities located to the edge. Criteria that the architect Albert Kahn followed in the daylight factories he designed for Henry Ford. In office buildings, cellular offices made way for pools with open spaces organized in parallel rows of identical desks. The interior was strictly divided by the furnishings, following the principle of elementary location or quadrillage. Each individual has his own place, and each place its individuals, as Foucault wrote about military discipline. This layout transformed desks into particles that could not merge into uncontrollable groups, and it did not facilitate communication between people. Paperwork passed from one table to another, just like the combined parts along an industrial assembly line, blurring the line between blue-collar and white-collar workers. The pool, or the bullpen, did not only provide a form of direct control, wielded from above by executives, but also permitted the exploitation of the psychological effect of social facilitation. Studied for the first time by Norman Triplett in 1897 and then again in the 30s by other scholars, it's an effect that conditions the productivity of the human being when in the presence of other people, situated in the same workplace and at the same time, the office hour. If the people are given simple tasks to complete, it actually causes an improvement. The pool, therefore, represented the field of visibility explored by Foucault in the Panopticon, which ensured control would function automatically. The visual relationship took place in this contested terrain and was of a coercive nature between employees and supervisors, but also employees and their colleagues. The managers did not sacrifice their private offices. The supervision was helped by the furniture. In the pool, employee desks all conformed to type. Instead of roll-top desks, companies such as American Steelcase now offered flat desk models so as to better monitor employee work and avoid messy piles of documents. This is the first desk of a Steelcase. 2 or 3 shallow drawers, strictly for professional use, complete a piece of furniture that rested on slim legs to make cleaning the floor easier. It was basic, standardized furniture, either in metal or folded sheet metal, designed to keep documents horizontal at all the time. Placed in the correct drawing, processed on the work surface, and then replaced elsewhere in the archives. These were the preferred models for white-collar workers, whereas executives continued to use heavy and elaborated wooden desks. The propaganda of control. In Europe, some of the Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret's innovative ideas about architecture lent themselves to offices. The plan libre, ribbon window, and free facade in particular were characteristics of the language of tertiary construction. This below is only a project of Mies van der Rohe, never built. The plan libre allowed greater flexibility and adaptability of the internal space, but also facilitated employee supervision, especially if this could be implemented from above, as was the case in the offices of the Van Eyck factory. Functionalist architects interpreted Taylorism both in terms of its practical qualities and modern language for office buildings. This is Le Corbusier in Moscow, the Centro Soyuz. In addition to pervading the organization of the interior, the theme of control became a way to relate architecture to the city. In Czechoslovakia, for example, the Old Age Pension Institute by the architects Havlicek and Honzik was a modern phalanstère against the chaos of the city. The Old Age Pension Institute was, however, also architecture for social control. Architects concentrated the offices in a rational cross structure, articulated into pulse and cellular office. This is the part for the office. The 2 lateral wings, here in pink, which completed the structure, housed the employee accommodation, shops, and various meeting areas. The Old Age Pension Institute was organically linked to the plan for the Zykov neighborhood designed by the same architects. This is Zykov. And this is the institute. Probably drawing on the echo of the Le Corbusier's contemporary technocratic visions. On the other hand, just as Charles Fourier Phalanstère brought multiple activities together in a single organism, so was all white-collar work concentrated in the Old Age Pensions Institute, so as to ensure that individual and community life coexisted and perhaps confirmed in an independent unit of production. The offices were standardized to a much smaller unit, which then dictated the size of all the furnishings, the doors and the windows, put above all the space granted to the employee on their workplace. Once more, in the Czech Republic in the same years, an extraordinary invention literally spelled out the control mechanism. In Zilin, in the administrative building number 21, the architect Karfik placed the chairman Jan Antonin Bachia office in a lift. This is the building, here is the lift. Equipped with all the comforts, it was a mobile room, which moved from floor to floor. In reality, an Orwellian eye kept white-collar workers under constant surveillance. Everybody called rich chairman Bachia, but nobody could escape from him. The eye of power, identified by Foucault in the Panopticon, finds its literary expression in the Bachia lift. This was the omniscient gaze of capitalism. Control as an instrument of political propaganda was instead implemented in the Casa del Fascio by Giuseppe Terragni in Como, local headquarters of the National Fascist Party and its organization. Here too was a gaze that directed the relationship between people. In fact, the office was designed around the crux of reciprocal visibility. It was the concept of instinctive control established between the public and employees of the Fascist Federation, wrote the architect Terragni. This is a photo montage. The architectural device adopted was transparency between the external and the internal. Fascism, wrote Terragni once more, is a glass house that everybody can see into. For Terragni, the Casa del Fascio was the utopian symbol of a transparent society, a world without dark areas or regulated by privilege. The offices were arranged around a central courtyard, illuminated from above, and they opened onto this, and vice versa, the city with large glass walls. Nothing was obscured the clarity of the gaze, neither that of the public outside or the employees inside the building. Even the tables and the chairs were designed by Terragni to be transparent thanks to the use of metallic tubing. The Sala del Direttorio, a meeting room dedicated to the Duce, were also projected outwards with large glass walls and made visible to the city. Everybody was able to monitor the party's conduct, but it was actually this latter that wielded control over their employees and their entire population. The reproduction of Benito Mussolini portraits is a constant memento of power. It was a psychological coercion due to the fact of being there and at the same time being exhibited to the city. Combination of the workplace. The emblem of the modern office was the workplace, or rather the collection of desks, drawers, storage, and seats used by the employees, and which defined their whole world, at least as far as the designers intended. Piled with paperwork to get through as quickly as possible, the workplace materialized the idea of the individual topos within the office building, the indispensable dimensions for the working life of the employee. Theories of exigent minimum, the minimum vital, developed by rational designers for the residential architecture, perceived the space in terms of economy and the rational control of each reduced and insignificant portion. Spontaneity and empiricism were radically excluded as they tended to bring chaos, wrote Marco Biraghi, the historians of architecture. These were ideas that lent themselves well to the functional demands of space planning and were instrumental in the progressive reduction of the workplace, now reduced to a unit in which pigeonholed the worker. In the Palazzo Montecatini in Milan, designed by Gio Ponti, Antonio Fornasoli, and Eugenio Soncini, the workplace was the unit that defined the entire architectural structure. The building was a niche-shaped structure. The either central part hierarchically demarked the position of the executive offices, here and here in the photo, while the employees were located in the two lateral wings. The space assigned to each employee was defined by this desk designed by Gio Ponti, and the walkways around these, here in red. The total of these microspaces might be expanded or reduced by moving hardwood panels with aluminum edges, here in the photo. The desk determined the size of the offices and the width and the position of the windows. Ponti designed everything, the chairs, the windows, the desks. Naturally, there was no lack of Taylorism inspiration in the Montecatini building. The architect Giuseppe Pagano said of the design, 1,500 employees entering haphazardly are a crowd. The architecture disciplines them. Or rather, it equips them, it reinforces their work. The large building takes on the appeal of a gigantic machine. Everything is a device. The vitality of its rhythm is that on an orderly keyboard. Within this large device, the desk with the man set before it was one indispensable key. The mechanism that permitted the Johnson Works building by Frank Lloyd Wright was less burning imperative and more suffused yearning. The streamlined building was an administrative machine in which the hierarchy of roles was shown by everybody's position within the space. Employees and secretaries were located in the great workroom on the ground floor, a large open space illuminated from above. Superiors were situated on the upper mezzanine, from where they could supervise. This is the mezzanine. While the company chairman and executives were in a superstructure that could be seen from the exterior in the shape of two ziggurats, here and here. This is the great workroom from above. These were situated symbolically at the peak of the architecture to represent their position in the corporation. Compared to the Larkin building desk, here Wright adopted a freer but equally complex disposition. 9 variants of tables were designed by the architect and produced by Steelcase Company. They were very complex instruments with overhanging surfaces and rotating doors, or with removable segments for a typewriter to sit in. The tables came to life when the employee or secretary sat before them, thanks to the repetitive action of their daily work. Initially, a 3-legged set was proposed, with 2 cushions on rotation so as to hide the warm fabric, this and this one. But the number of accidents convinced the architect to opt for a 4-legged model, less elegant but safer. In Italy, the theme of the workplace was tackled at the central problem concerning the office space by Renato Angeli, Carlo De Carli, and Luigi Olivieri architects. In the modern office exhibition at the Triennale di Milano in 1940, the architect presented the various office interiors, where desk complexes were the defining feature. Among the various models, the executive and secretary desk, in this photo, was a sort of central island within the space, articulated in such a way as to implicate the two people in a private vis-à-vis dialogue. It was therefore a form of hierarchical control, as the desk surface absorbed the secretary, here, a little space, sat on a small datillo seat, the typewriting chair, while it became a free liner, here, for the executive who sat on a more comfortable armchair. This is a wonderful image of the surrealistic painter Delvaux about the Second World War and the theme of the offices. Go on, the placard pattern. After the Second World War, office work was in fierce competition with factory work. In fact, the number of people employed in the administrative and bureaucratic sectors increased exponentially. As the primary needs of the worker were apparently resolved, the economic boom of the 50s lived off the cult of the present. White-collar workers became part of a planned economic mechanism that regulated both work and leisure by making their needs uniform. It was a climate of apparent democratization, whose failures has been previously denounced by Marx, Horkheimer, and Theodor Adorno. The intention was to classify and organize consumers and hold them firmly in your power. This is Adorno. Management scholars had previously deemed routine to be fundamental to development of work. Now, routine was disguised as nature, written indelibly in the mind before the body. In fact, human relations scholars no longer relied on the economic incentives promoted by Taylorism. Rather, they examined the emotional, such as the absence of tension between executives and employees, and environmental variables to develop employee output. Organizing the human factor was the imperative that resounded throughout the offices. Control was no longer implemented through solely visual means, but by bringing symbolic values into play, such as the belonging to an elite clique. All of us know this famous film, Department, and the symbols is the key of the manager toilet. And objet petit autre in Lacan theory. The big family of the corporation was the new despotism. White-collar workers were massed into a silent force to be governed using manipulation, appealing to their emotional participation in the company. The employee was an other direct man, the David Reisman definition, whose social character was influenced by the expectation and preference of others. The only possible response was behavioral conformity, which in offices corresponds with forced group adaptation. Rather than corporation, it was in fact subtle competition. From an architectural point of view, the sense of belonging to the corporation was signaled by various factors. One, the recognizability of the company, whose building rose up like a landmark in the city. This is the famous Lever House. Two, the search of a new type of beauty, or rather a clean and ordered aesthetic, which was reflected in the curtain wall facades and shared areas. This is the ONU. Of this, the lobby gained primary importance. It was the stage where the offices interacted with the metropolis. It welcomed guests, dictated directions employees were to in, and opened onto rows of shops or internal garden. Finally, the implacable partner, or the use of a geometric grid to regulate the spatial layout of the building, the position of technical systems and the windows, the design of the floor and furnishings. This is the grid in plan, and this is the spatial grid. The quadrillage described by Foucault, which controlled the layout of people within the architecture, appeared in post-war offices in the form of the grid, which placed every person in their place. The open space was no longer the bullpen from previous decades, but an elegant and functional space. Yet employees were still in a cage. It was perhaps invisible to their eyes, but not to the gaze of the supervising them, the organization man, according to William White's famous definition. And this is Jack Lemmon in his grid. The latter were destined for other types of offices. The cellular offices were furnished with rational-style furniture produced by Knoll International or Herman Miller Company, wooden panels, carpets, and exterior view. The hierarchical differences were clearly displayed in the offices of the corporation chairman. Here, the furniture design was customized according to the test of a good design. But for the most part, the management did not hesitate to represent themselves with stylish room, fake period style, and antique furniture. These two rooms are for two different presidents and with a little difference of age. 1952 the first and 1958 the second. And in the second, all is false. Between the 50s and 60s, an international style established itself in the world of office interiors. This language, replicable in all the great metropolises of the world, corresponded to the idea of a universal space, flexibility, artificial climate control, and economic furnishings. A distant, planned elegance reigned throughout. The atmosphere was different compared to the past. The mass of white-collar workers no longer had to be forcibly harnessed, but adequately absorbed the rules of production. The human project illusion. In the late 50s, management studies were enhanced by further analysis by the motivationalist school. A new anthropology of the human being emerged, based on analysis of their needs. Abraham Maslow taught that human beings were guided by wants and needs, according to a pyramid hierarchy. At the base lay psychological and safety needs. At the tip, personal, interior, and psychological fulfillment. In the tertiary world, this drive for self-realization became an interesting tool to use to the hands of the company. Incentivizing the ambition of employees could increase their productivity. Job enrichment, as promoted by the psychologist Frederick Herzberg, also contributed to the idea of making the employee more involved in the development of the corporation, improving the quality of their tasks and their working environment. These contributions were joined by emphasis on work teams by Francis Likert, working groups based on the ability to interact and goals to be met, and the sociometric analysis by Jacob Levi Moreno. Moreno investigated group dynamics through the mathematical study of the psychological characteristics of each individual. The idea that a relationship between working groups could be facilitated and guided by the environment took hold. Factors as reducing the physical distance of workplaces, access to shared areas and circulation were all taken in consideration. In the late 50s, work on the physiological and physical connections between people and observation on the curvilinear progress of the work floor animated a new idea for the office, the Bürolandschaft or office landscaping. Born in the wake of the theories of the Quickborger team, the Broder Schnell, office landscaping sought to reduce the hierarchical distance between managers and white-collar workers by the design of landscape interiors. They consisted of islands composed of furniture, log partitions and plants, and eliminated the private executive offices, replaced with meeting areas to facilitate participation among colleagues. The visual result was a sinuous, apparently democratic archipelago that was presented by architects as an open working space that was relaxing and informal. Forms of control were not entirely absent, however. The executives were, in fact, at an advantage as there were no walls dividing the space, but only low partition and furniture. Moreover, the gaze from above was replaced by the reciprocal surveillance of police. Horizontal control was implemented, since office landscaping made sure that everyone was aware of what was happening in the office, even when not directly involved. One of the greatest problems was, in fact, this lack of privacy. The din of typewriters and conversation between colleagues created much distractions. These inconveniences were tackled by using soundproof materials for the partitions, carpeted floors, and inserting white noise to decrease the background hubbub. Lost illusion. The democratic utopia of office landscaping was destined to fail. In the late 60s, the architect Hermann Erzberger returned to that hypothesis with a proposal for vertical office landscaping. The Dutch architect saw the theme of empty space, seen before in the Larkin building, as a special opportunity for a visual and verbal dialogue between people. But now it was a complex and humanized dialogue. Erzberger also revived the hive metaphor, but this time the single cells could be personalized by their occupants. In the office of the Central Bear Insurance Company, Erzberger sought to mediate between the bureaucratic model of work organization and the requirements of employees, including the need to feel at home in the office. It was a city within a city, with a reticular wave within which each individual could make their working place their own. The complex was divided into 4 sectors, 3 for offices and 1 for social service and recreation, nursery, canteen and bar to use with one's family. The offices were arranged in platforms and on different levels, overlooking central spaces illuminated from above. There were no walls between one environment and the other. The gaze of the employee could take in the entire inhabited space or just a part. The office was a living meeting stage where employees could be spectators or actors, thanks to the change to constantly vary their point of view. This complex spatial internal organization generated intense personal relationship, of sharing and participation, but at the same time protected personal privacy. Employees could decorate their space as they liked, with no type of standard used by the management. The office was transformed into a place where the worker could be himself or herself. The central bear represented the unicum amidst the offices in the 60s. In general, the social ideology that Bürolandschaft supported had been weak in its attempt to obtain consensus from the employees. The democracy of the same desk for everyone, the office garden, and the flexibility of the space were remedies, but could not solve the primordial idea of the office as a work factory and a field of visibility for control. To respect the need for privacy, office designer created increasingly complex furnishings. The prototype was the Acton office system by Robert Probst for the Herman Miller Company. It was the result of research processes that saw collaborations with the designer George Nelson, scholars of proxemics, mathematics, psychologists, and anthropologists. Probst wrote, "More than anything else, we are dealing with a minor-edited living space. This is the idea." The result was a furniture that exploited the vertical space. Thanks to the adoption of the panel system, a highly organized microenvironment was created, where everything was to hand and employees could potentially isolate themselves from others. Unfortunately, the followers of Robert Probst and the need to make the most of the office space radicalized the idea of a macro-environment built with furniture. In the end, the furniture was transformed into a number of boxes that crowded the office space. The result was a cubicle land, not unlike prison cells of the type preceding the panopticon. The higher control continued to surveil all of this, as those standing observed the others sat at their work. But compared to the quadrillage outlined by Foucault, in cubicle land, nobody looked each other in the eye, not even a glimpse. I finish.